Check, check, 1, 2.
Events that we're sponsoring. My name is Elizabeth Silver. I'm the chair of the Northampton Democratic City Committee, and we welcome you, along with our co-partner, Northampton Open Media, to this exciting event. And you can see all of our candidates are here. To the candidates. Thank you so much for participating tonight, and thank you for traveling to Northampton. While the people in Western Mass may have values that you find are shared in all regions of the Commonwealth, the needs of the Connecticut River Valley are very different from the needs of the Boston area. It's important for us to see those who represent us and those who want to represent us physically here in our region and doing the work to understand both the unique challenges we face as well as what makes us great. We're delighted to host you in Northampton and look forward to learning about your visions for our region. So thank you so much for coming. A number of people have asked about Attorney General Healy, and she is very sorry she can't come because of a scheduling conflict, so I just wanted to make sure you knew she was invited. There are a few very important thank yous to, again, Northampton Open Media. Thank you for all your help, patience, and thank you for live streaming not only this event, but the event on May 2nd, where we'll be joined by candidates for Attorney General, Secretary of State, and Auditor. Please join us at Smith Vocational High School at 6 p.m., and we'll have a great event that night too. Thanks to Sam Hopper, my partner in planning, to Stephen Eldridge and the Northampton High School students. You are awesome, and you give me hope for the future. And thanks to all of the Northampton Democratic City Committee people and chairs that are here helping tonight, and all the behind-the-scenes people that help with the production. Thank you to Claire Higgins, our former esteemed mayor, and to our, yes? And to our stellar panel. Claire will be introducing them when she gets started in just a minute. There are many elected officials and here tonight, and we are so grateful for and appreciate your presence. I hope you'll forgive me if I don't recognize and introduce all of you, but I'm opting to save time for more questions, so I hope that's okay, but thank you for coming. We're very grateful. We received a lot of great questions in advance. They've all been submitted to the panelists, and so I'm sure we're going to be hearing many of them tonight. Thank you to those folks that did that for taking the time to write them. And just one housekeeping is on the way out. Please make sure you sign all the nomination papers that are in the lobby so the candidates can all get on the ballot. And in closing, just please make sure you mark your calendars for the May 2nd event. And without further ado, and I just wanted you to see all the candidates. They'll all be back in about a half an hour or so. And thank you all for coming. And they will be back soon. Right now, we're going to start with Senator Chang Diaz. And I'm going to turn it over to Claire Higgins. Thank you.
Everybody, and it's nice to be here in the Northampton Little Theater, and I just want to have a moment for Richard Russia, who passed away and who was integral in the renovations of this theater when the building was renovated in the late 90s and early 2000s. So just a moment for Richard. Okay. I'll echo her welcome to the candidates, to the panelists, and to the audience. I'm going to introduce the panelists. First is Bill Newman. Bill's a partner at the Northampton law firm of Lesser, Newman, Alio, and Nasser, and the host of the Bill Newman Show on WHMP Radio. Bill's also a monthly columnist for the Daily Hampshire Gazette and appears in this capacity as a journalist. Dan Crowley is the executive editor of the Daily Hampshire Gazette, the Greenfield Recorder, and the Athol Daily News. He's worked as a local government and award-winning investigative reporter and editor in the Pioneer Valley for more than 2 decades. And finally, Nancy Cohen. Nancy Cohen is a senior reporter with the New England Public Media. She's also shares her experience in the field and love of journalism with her students at Smith College. Previously, she served as the environmental reporter for WNPR in Connecticut and Midwestern editor at National Public Radio. She's won several journalism awards, but she's most proud of having a cow named after her by a Western Mass dairy farmer who she has written about. The cow will be outside after the debate. So the format tonight, the order of opening statements, answering questions, and all of that was determined randomly by a computer. I'll be calling on the candidates in the order that they were randomly chosen, and that is, I'm really good with children's books. But we're not going to do a random rotation of questions with the governor's candidate. We decided to skip that part. So welcome to Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, and we're going to start the questioning now with you. And I'm going to start a 25-minute timer because that's pretty much the block of time we had available. I'll start it now. And I don't know. That was interesting. And the first piece here has 2 minutes for an opening statement. Okay.
Can you guys hear me? All right. We'll see how that lasts. Good evening. It's good to be with you guys. Mayor Higgins, thank you. The esteemed panel. Looking forward to mixing up with you. And to all of you guys here tonight, thank you for having me. It's been a full day for me here in Springfield, Holyoke, and Northampton. It certainly won't be my last. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sonia Chang Diaz. I am a mom. I'm a former public school teacher, and I'm Massachusetts' first Latina and first Asian American state senator. And thank you. I am running for governor very simply because every day it is getting harder and harder for families to live in our state. And over the past 13 years, I have fought like hell on Beacon Hill to tackle our state's biggest challenges. And in that time, I have seen firsthand that we still have too many people in our state government, including in our own party, if we're being honest, who are more concerned with holding on to power rather than doing something with it. And it doesn't have to be that way. Because we can, in Massachusetts, we can do big things. We can deliver debt-free, quality education to every kid in our state from birth into adulthood. We could pass a Green New Deal to win the fight against climate change and create tens of thousands of new good-paying jobs. We can close our racial wealth divide, rebuild the middle class, tackle our housing crisis. What we need in order to achieve these things is we need to stand together. We need to see each other's fights as our own. And we need to elect a governor who does not just say the right things, but who has shown that she will come off of the sidelines to take on our toughest fights, even when it is not politically convenient. That's why I'm in this race. We've shown before that we can win big together. We're going to talk about some of those things tonight. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you about the issues that are most important to you.
Okay, thank you. And the first questioner will be Nancy Cohen.
Welcome, Senator.
Hi, Nancy.
We live in a great area here in Western Mass, and we love it, those of us who live here. We have vibrant cities, not just here in Northampton, but in Hampden County, Franklin County, out in the Berkshires and other parts of Hampshire County. We have great neighborhoods where people watch out for each other. We have beautiful places to hike and mountain vistas and rich soil to farm. And we have strong businesses and new businesses and dedicated teachers and professors. It's a great place. But we also have our challenges. What do you think is the #1 challenge in Western Mass, and how would you address it if you were to become governor?
It's of course hard to choose one. I think that the truth is this working? Can you guys hear me in the back? All right, good. Thank you for the thumbs up in the back. That the biggest challenge facing Western Mass, I would say, is the biggest challenge facing our state, and it manifests differently in different places. But the bottom line is that the access to all of the wonderful things that you just described, Nancy, and the joys of living in this state are not equally available to all families. And in so many cases, access to those riches depend on the zip code that you live in or that were born into, the color of your skin, or what's in your bank account. And that is a divide that penetrates across our state. Of course, in Western Mass, there are things that are more true here, right, and harder here. Transportation leaps to mind, as an obvious deficiency, right? And I'll just jump right to the point, right to the meaty stuff. One of the things that you will find in the transportation plan that I've laid out on my website, you can visit it at soniachangdiaz.com, is East-West Rail, right? And that's, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a really obvious thing that we need to do. And that would open up access to so many of the economic opportunities, the educational opportunities, the wealth building opportunities in our state, and tackle the issue of climate action at the same time. So we need to invest in our transportation infrastructure through East-West Rail. We also need to do it through greater investment in our regional transit authorities, because it's great to bring people in and out of Springfield and Boston and the places in between, but there's also so much great wealth and creativity and assets in our regional economies that we could do better to enliven here in Massachusetts, and in Western Massachusetts in particular. And if we can get it right on transportation, that's going to help us get it right on housing and economic access, and it will go a long way to curing that core challenge, of course, which is the disparity in access to all of those things.
Okay, thank you. Trying to remember who goes next. I think it's Bill, right?
I think so, Claire. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator, welcome.
I pick you.
I have a number of questions I'd like to ask you about education, public education in particular, and it's a little bit random which one to start with, but let me pose this to you. In 2016, as you know, there was an intense campaign involving Question 2 across Massachusetts, and intense here in Western Massachusetts, to be sure. And that, for those of our audience who don't recall, was a question about whether or not the number of charter schools would be increased, or whether the Department of Education, elementary and secondary education, would have the authority to increase the number of charter schools. I would like to know your position with regard to charter schools, and what changes, if anything, you think should be made and you would advocate for making with regard to how charter schools are funded.
Absolutely. So, Bill, I do not support lifting the cap on charter schools. Charter schools had an appeal when they were first proposed, both in this country and in this state, of being laboratories for innovation. They have never lived up to that billing yet in Massachusetts, primarily because, and this is an issue I dwelled in deeply in 2016 and the years leading up to it. I chaired the education committee. Some of the gray hairs that I have, I've named charter schools.
I have a few of those and I didn't share anything.
But simply because we have never actually achieved an environment in our policy in Massachusetts where we hold charter schools to the same high standards that we demand and expect of our district schools in terms of the population of students that they are serving, both who comes in the door and who goes out the back door, and the conditions of funding and licensure. It's just there, and anyone who's been through 8th grade science, right, knows the scientific method, and that you can change one variable if you're running an experiment, right? And it's a lousy experiment that doesn't tell you anything if you're changing more than one variable. We've got way more than one variable in the experiment that we're running right now in this laboratory of innovation. And so it's not really giving us valuable policy learning to take back into our core public education system. So I have been and will continue to be a fierce advocate for tightening up our system so that we are asking and expecting the same thing from charter school operators under our existing cap that we expect of our district schools. I'll also say here that the state needs to live up to its dang promise of reimbursing local school districts for the costs, the overhead, the sort of double overhead costs that districts pay when a student transfers to a charter school, but the district school still continues to carry the overhead costs, right? When one student goes from this classroom, this charter classroom, district classroom to charter classroom, right? You don't get to lose 1/28th of your teacher's salary, right? Or 1/28th of your heating bill or your electric bill. And we've promised as a state that we were going to reimburse districts for that. And I think maybe 1 or 2 years since we made that statutory promise have we lived up to it. In the Student Opportunity Act, which I think you probably know, right? I fought for 5 years to get passed. We recommitted ourselves as a state to that funding promise. And I've made an ironclad commitment on the campaign that as governor, I will veto any budget that does not fully live up to the funding schedule committed to in the Student Opportunity Act, including the charter reimbursement. And here's the last thing that I'll say about charters, which is 95% plus of our students in Massachusetts are educated through the district school system. So, that we got to keep our eye on that prize, right? And the amount of time and agony that we spent debating charter school policy, gets us a tiny, marginal solution. What we need to do is focus on getting it right in our district schools.
Mr. Crowley.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for being here, and to Northampton Open Media and the Democratic City Committee for inviting the Gazette here tonight. My first question is one came from the public. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs has recommended closing the VA Medical Center in Leeds here. Mm-hmm. It's one of the oldest VA medical centers in the country, if not the oldest. This still has to go through an approval process, take some time, include public hearings. As governor, how will you ensure that the VA remains strong here, and even if the VA Medical Center continues to, in that the VA Medical Center continues to serve our veterans, do you have any plans to make healthcare and mental health care more accessible to veterans and to people who need services but have few resources, including transportation to appointments?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, goodness. So, as governor, certainly I would not be abashed about using both the bully pulpit and the organizing platform to advocate, advocate with our federal delegation, advocate with the federal government, directly with the VA, and to work in partnership with the local delegation here, as I am sure Senator Vilas is already doing, on behalf of the VA. To fight hard to keep the VA open. I actually have a VA medical center in my Senate district also, and I remember it wasn't as drastic as a closure of the whole, the medical center, but there was a move a few years back to close one of the transportation lines, the bus line that served, or rather the transit line that served, that went right up to the door of the VA Medical Center in Jamaica Plain. And I was very proud to fight together with the local delegation in Boston to make sure that we saved that transportation line, because of course, and it's so good, I'm glad you embedded that in your question, right? It's great to have the VA Medical Center, but if people can't get there, it's not able to achieve its full mission. So we got to push on the federal government to keep it open, right, to be there as a partner, but we, as a state and local communities, need to also be a full partner and making sure that we are funding, sustaining, expanding the transportation access so that our veterans can actually access the care that we fight hard to retain at the medical center. To your question about, was it mental and behavioral health services?
Yeah, mental health care.
Mental health care. So this is something that I visited one of your wonderful new healthcare providers here in Northampton, the Trans Health Center, earlier today, and was here getting an earful from them about the still unreality in our state of mental health parity in insurance rates. And so this isn't, we've done this in statute. We've required insurers to pay equal rates for mental health care as for physical health care. But we see that the reality on the ground is still not lived up to that. So this is a tough and detailed nut to crack. We have to keep drilling down and finding out, what are the barriers? Why are providers still not getting those equal payments? And to keep doing the sort of unglamorous blocking and tackling of, taking down those barriers. I will say this is just one little piece of the puzzle. But one of the things that I have learned in recent years in my role as chair of the Cannabis Policy Committee in the legislature is that our veterans cannot get access to a medical cannabis card in Massachusetts because they are not allowed they can't get a prescription from their VA health provider. So we're working out ways to take down those barriers to allow our veterans to get access to a medical card without a prescription from the VA, so that they can access their health care at a medical price without the taxation of commercial marijuana use.
Okay. Nancy, I think you have the next question.
Senator, a recent legislative report found that the state needs $1.5 billion over time to build a strong child care infrastructure. House leaders are now proposing a budget with $110 million for early education and child care, and that would be just for one fiscal year. And within that is a provision for tripling funding for the salaries of child care providers. Right now, though, child care subsidies from the state for income-eligible families are lower in Western Mass than in other parts of the state. For example, a child care center in Western Mass gets a state subsidy about $66 a day to care for an infant, but a center in Metro West Boston gets about $90 a day. It's based on a market rate survey, not the actual cost of care. A big part of the cost is labor. Many child care centers here have trouble offering high enough pay and benefits to attract enough workers. So right now, not all of our region's child care classrooms are open and fewer kids are being served. As governor, what would you do to make child care more affordable and accessible in Western Mass? And what would you do to address workforce compensation, training, and advancement?
Yeah. I'm so glad you included this question. I love talking about early education and care, Nancy. This is one of the core tenets that I am campaigning on every single day, which is that we need to quit nibbling around the edges in Massachusetts, and we should have done this years ago, honestly. We need to go to universal, affordable early education and care in our state. We are one of the wealthiest states and one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And it should sober us and it should embarrass us that other states with far fewer resources than Massachusetts are lapping us when it comes to standing up universal early education and care systems. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, so I am just a few years out from those bills, but probably some of you in this audience and some of you watching it at home are probably carrying those bills right now. It costs about $20,000 a year to pay for an early education and care slot, and that's if you can find one. Where, in many parts of our state, 50% of our residents in Massachusetts live in child care deserts, or even if you have that $20K a year, you can't find a slot. And we've seen so clearly over the past 2 years of pandemic how much our economy rests on an extremely rickety early education and care system. And you named it, Nancy, but I will underscore it and lift it up, that in this field, we are paying providers, educators, and let's name it, people vastly disproportionately, women and women of color, poverty wages to educate our youngest learners at the most, absorptive, if that's a word, period of their lives when we know we get the greatest value for every dollar that we invest. So we need to do early education and care. It needs to be quality. We need to compensate our educators on par with our educators in in our K through 12 system, so that we can retain them, so that we can raise standards across the board. And look, you mentioned $1.5 billion. I'm not hiding the ball here, right? This is a transformational change in Massachusetts. It's going to cost a price tag that ends with the word billion. And when I started the fight back in 2015, 2016 for the Student Opportunity Act, which now is pumping $1.5 billion a year anew once it's fully phased in into our K through 12 system, people said, Sonia, that's impossible. That will never happen. You'll never get that through Beacon Hill. And for 4 years, we had to organize a movement across this state that brought together, urban, suburban, east, west, north, south, and we built a movement to make it impossible for leaders on Beacon Hill to ignore the interests of working families and their kids. That's exactly what we need to do and what we will do under a Chang Diaz administration, again, to make universal, affordable early education and care a reality in our state.
Mr. Newman.
Senator, I'd like to follow up with a question that's also based on financial considerations, at least in part. And that has to do with how money is being spent in the criminal justice system. The Department of Correction recently announced a plan to close the state prison, maximum security prison at Cedar Junction. I'd like to know whether you see the closing of this prison as having a beneficial financial effect on the Commonwealth, And if so, how you would reallocate those funds. In the same regard, I'd like to pose to you the question about whether you support Senate Bill 2030, which is the proposed 5-year moratorium on the design and construction of new prisons in the state, and in particular, as a practical matter, focuses on preventing the design and construction of a new women's prison at Framingham. And then lastly, if you could get to this bigger picture question, I would appreciate your perspective on how you would seek to accomplish reducing the criminal justice burden, in particular on low-income women who are often imprisoned for crimes associated with poverty.
Mm-hmm. All right, there's a lot of meat in there. See if I can do that in how long? 3 minutes? All right. Prison construction, that's easy. I'm a yes. I mean, not on prison construction, on the moratorium. I want to make sure that's clear. So yes, very proud co-sponsor of that legislation, proud to support it, and have been for quite some time. And let me say, the announcement of the closure of this prison is a great moment for our state. It is a victory that we should all feel an ownership stake in and feel proud of. And it's, we as Democrats and dare I say maybe some progressives in this room, I think, we sort of go from disaster to disaster and what can we solve next and what can we solve next. Let's take a moment to savor this victory. This is, there's a direct line from the 2018 Criminal Justice Reform Act that I bet many people in this room fought for, and the closure of this prison, right? The sentencing reforms that we fought for and got in that bill have helped reduce the number of bodies that we are incarcerating in this state. And the closure of this prison is one great sort of mile marker in that process. But I will tell you asked about what does this mean for the cost savings. And I don't take for granted for a second that we actually are going to sort of magically see, it wouldn't be magically, it would be logically, see the cost savings from that, because even though we have seen since the passage of the 2018 Criminal Justice Reform Bill, we've seen a steady decline in our jail and prison population in Massachusetts. I'll give you guys one guess which way the spending trend line has gone in our jails and prisons in Massachusetts. You got it, up. The answer is up. It's backwards. We have to call this out. We have to shine a light on it. There's a lot of better things like early education and care that we need to be spending money on in this state. And we need to get real and we need to get specific and intentional about pulling money out of our carceral system and getting into a virtuous cycle of reinvestment, prevention, and support in communities that have been over-policed and over-incarcerated for generations. That is exactly why I have filed for a number of years the Justice Reinvestment Act, which provides a mechanism to do exactly that, to require the Department of Corrections and our Executive Office of Public Safety to calculate how much money we are saving each year from the reduction in our jail and prison population, and to directly route half of that savings into a Justice Reinvestment Fund that's targeted to those communities that have been over-incarcerated, and that is governed by, those granting decisions have to be governed by people who come from the target communities. And that's just an example, it's a model of what you could expect to see under my governorship, is being really intentional about chasing down those dollars and reallocating them. I want to call out here, and I'll be short, that Representative Sabadosa, who I'm very proud to be endorsed by in this race. Thank you for sending her to the legislature. Rep. Sabadosa and I have teamed up on the ACES bill, which is another version of this, to make sure that we're investing money in civilian emergency responders, so that we can invest those dollars more effectively, more wisely for prevention and care rather than control and incarceration.
I'll note that we started a little bit late. I think we have time for one more question, Dan, and then if the answer is tight and the closing remarks are tight, we'll be on track.
Okay, just one more question?
Just one more question,
Okay.
and you get to ask it.
Okay, thanks. I want to go back to the East-West Rail. You mentioned it in your first answer. It sounds like you support it.
I do.
Where is it on your priority list, and where do you see, what role do you see the governor playing in ensuring that it remains viable and moving forward? And then secondly, in what specific ways do you see it fostering economic development in the region And do you have any funding plans for it?
Okay, so again, a lot of packed in there. So in terms of where does it fall on my priority list, I'll tell you guys, I have a full-blown policy platform up on my website. You can check it out. I think it's important that as a candidate, I be accountable to you and willing to come and talk about specifics, not speak in just platitudes and sort of pretty words, but really show you the substance of how I envision taking the state from here to there. And the second full-scale policy plan that we released on my campaign. The first one was education, which in addition to universal early education and care, I want to mention also calls for debt-free public college in Massachusetts. The second plan was a climate action plan, and it is a Green New Deal for Massachusetts. And right there in that plan is a huge section on transportation in which we commit to East-West Rail. So it is high on my priority list because that is the second plan that we released on the campaign. In terms of how do I see it, connecting with economic opportunity and development? Was that the question, Dan? I mean, look, I think that's plain as day to you as well as me, right? When people can get to and from opportunities, we're going to have, a workforce that has more access to jobs and economic opportunities. We're going to have employers that are more willing to site, further west and in, more diverse regions of the state. We're going to have entrepreneurs, local businesses that can get their goods and their people to and from market more easily. So it's hard to overstate the economic impacts of investing in our transportation infrastructure. And then what will I do as governor, and what's the funding plan? I'll speak broadly about the transportation investments and the workforce investments that my Green New Deal calls for. We need to put a price on carbon in this state. We will not be able, and look, that's not the only thing we're going to do, right? We need to pass the Fair Share Amendment to make sure that we are asking for everyone in this state to pay for the things that we say we believe in and in a fair proportion to their capacity. So we need that Fair Share Amendment. We need to put a price on carbon because we will not be able to afford to hit the benchmarks we need to hit in time to avert climate disaster without a financing system on the front end, because it is going to require investment, and we need to speak honestly with people about that. So putting a price on carbon, and there's a lot of different ways to do that, but that's the fundamentals of how we're going to make these large-scale investments in our physical infrastructure and our human infrastructure to do things like East-West Rail.
Thank you. So this is your moment to have a closing statement. I think we've given you 2 minutes.
All right,
for
I'll try and be
closing
frugal.
statement.
So, look, we have talked about some pretty big, meaty issues that we need to tackle as a Commonwealth, and the change that we need to do in order to make this state work for all families. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. The work to deliver on those things is not always going to be easy. And in fact, mostly it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. But I know that these kinds of transformational changes are possible because I have lived transformational change like this. You can see it in the things that I have helped build and deliver over the past 13 years. You can see it in the coalition of parents and teachers and students and researchers and business leaders, north, south, east, west in this state, that we brought together to win the Student Opportunity Act. And you can see it in the outside-in organizing that made true criminal justice reform possible in 2018. You can see it in the police accountability law that protesters called us to in 2020. And you can see it in our historic transgender equal rights laws here in Massachusetts. The problem is, my friends, that these kinds of wins are still the exception rather than the rule. And I don't know about you guys, I know about you because you just clapped, but I don't know the rest. But I am tired of those things being the exception rather than the rule. We need to make audacious, root cause problem solving the rule. We are a state with more millionaires than 46 other states. We for damn sure can pass a millionaire's tax. And we can make universal early education and care, and debt-free college for every kid in Massachusetts a reality. We're a state that should be leading on voting rights and health equity and greening our energy use and building that 21st century transit system. We could close the racial wealth divide in this state, think about that, and solve our housing crisis. But we cannot do these things, they're not gonna be easy, they're not always gonna be comfortable, but this world is within reach. Don't let anyone tell you that it isn't. When it comes to winning real change for our state though, our biggest obstacles are not ones of natural resources or technology or know-how. Our biggest limiters are not even public opinion. Our biggest limiter is a lack of courage and urgency from our elected officials. If you want a governor who will stand up and show up for the things that she believes in and build effective coalitions that will put change in the end zone, this is the campaign for you. I did not get into this race because I thought it was gonna be easy. And I didn't get into it because I saw a good career opportunity. I got into it because I have stood on the front lines with families across this state for my whole career. I know the urgency of this moment that we're living in, and I know the future that we can build together, and I'm asking you to come build it with me. You can sign up at soniachangdiaz.com. And please indulge me, I just gotta give a shout out and love again to Rep. Sabadosa for her strong support in this race, school committee member Emily Seraphy Cox, Councilor Rachel Maori, Jamila Gore, Marissa Elkins, and Garrick Perry for their strong support. I hope you guys will become supporters too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Can we get some big applause here? Thank you. All right.
I don't know why that is.
Do we want to take a half a minute break? No, I don't think so. Can we just, is it all right if we just move right into it? Because we did start a little bit late. Okay, good. So now, without further ado, let's introduce the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. And they're going to actually introduce themselves, but come on in.
So while they're finding their seats, I'll just note that it's a similar format. There will be opening statements from each of them, in an order that was untouched by human hands, done totally on the computer, so it's totally fair. And then they will each have an opening statement, and then the questions will rotate with our great panel of journalists from the Valley. So everybody's finding their spot.
I'm still working, thanks. No, it's okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, we're just waiting on you, Senator. Okay, welcome to all of our candidates for Lieutenant Governor. And we have, this is your moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the questioning. So the first person for the opening remarks is Tammy Govea.
Great. Can you all hear me? Is this on?
I think you might want to take your mask off too. I hate to tell you.
Can you hear me now? Excellent, great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth, and the students here, the Northampton Democratic Committee. Thank you to Nancy and Dan and Bill, as well as former Mayor Claire Higgins. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you for a few minutes, or for a couple hours, I guess, this evening. I'm State Representative Tammy Govea. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because I believe that we deserve leaders in the corner office who are putting our health, our well-being, and our dignity at the center of decision-making. And I believe that in a state that is as rich in resources, there's no reason for any person or region to be left behind. I grew up in the city of Lowell. I was really lucky in that my grandfather had been in the Carpenters Union. That put my family on solid economic footing. It meant my parents were able to buy a two-family home. They rented out that upstairs apartment. That allowed them to stretch their wages and weather the economic storms of the 70s and the 80s. That was not the case for far too many of my neighbors whose families really struggled with the indignities of intergenerational poverty, structural racism, xenophobia, and the impacts of substance use disorder and domestic violence. It It was being adjacent to a lot of these experiences that instilled in me a desire to give back to my community because it instilled in me a deep sense of empathy. It's why I've been a public health social worker for 25 years, leading on key issues like the opioid crisis and environmental justice. I'm a state representative. I have been standing up and standing with our working families, standing up for racial justice and LGBTQ rights. I've been a single mom for the last 14 years. So a lot of the financial struggles that families are facing today are ones that I have lived with as well. As your next Lieutenant Governor, I will leverage my experiences as a single parent, as a state representative, as a doctor of public health to put the health, well-being, and dignity of every resident at the heart of decision-making. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next is Brett Barrow.
Thank you all for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to be with my colleagues in talking to the voters today. It's the best way that democracy works. My name is Brett Barrow, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, and I'm running for a reason. And that's because as Massachusetts and the nation emerges from COVID as a pandemic to become COVID endemic to our lives, Massachusetts is at an inflection point. And the decisions we make in the next administration will define the character of the Commonwealth for our next generation. And I believe that if we keep going back to the same solutions, we'll keep getting the same answers. And we had problems before COVID hit. COVID's exacerbated them, and I think we need to figure out how to address them going forward. I'm a distinctly different candidate, and my background comes from having addressed many of the problems that are critical to Massachusetts directly where those problems present. I teach at Babson College. I've been on the faculty there for 6 years. And I know that our education system is critically important to the state as a whole because we have the most educated workforce in the nation. And it's also important to each one of us individually because it helps determine our station in life. I also know that 50% of all the teachers are thinking about resigning and going into private sector because they're having troubles affording it. The other thing that I did was that I was a small business owner up in Orange, Massachusetts for 22 years, and the pandemic destroyed small businesses. And I think we need to have somebody who has experience addressing those two and other critical issues so that we get solutions that actually meet the needs of our various communities. My name's Brett Barrow. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because I believe the Lieutenant Governor skills should complement rather than duplicate those of the governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Driscoll.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, perfect. I'm Kim Driscoll. I'm the mayor in Salem and a candidate for Lieutenant Governor. I do want to thank the Northampton Democratic City Committee, our moderators, and our host, former Mayor Claire Higgins, for being here tonight, and as well as the audience for giving us a chance to share a little bit more about our experience and why we're so enthusiastic about this opportunity. Just to start with a little bit about my background and why I personally am excited about this race. My dad grew up in Lynn. He was a career Navy guy. That's where he met my mom, who's a native of Trinidad, and I was a Navy brat. Born in Hawaii, lived on both coasts. I actually came to Salem to go to college, fell in love with the city, fell in love with my husband, Nick, who is a second-generation union bricklayer. We like to tease. He's putting his political science degree to good use, throwing in brick and block throughout the eastern Massachusetts. And together we've raised 3 kids in Salem, a very welcoming and inclusive community. Serving as mayor has not been my first foray into local government. I actually worked for the city of Chelsea as they came out of receivership, first as their chief legal counsel and then as their deputy city manager. Really taught me the value of good government and, frankly, who pays the price when there are failures in leadership. Seeing a need for action in my hometown of Salem, I ran for mayor intent on improving city services, getting our fiscal house in order, and working to make sure we could make the types of investments that related to the quality of life that people who lived in Salem really wanted. I've been fortunate to have been reelected 5 times. We've improved an array of city services. Salem is now the 3rd most visited destination in Massachusetts. We have made historic investments in parks and infrastructure and schools. And I'm excited about this opportunity to serve as Lieutenant Governor because I know that no city and town can be successful without a strong state partner. I recognize that we have a symbiotic relationship between local government and state government. It's important that we have a bridge and a strategic partner. As Lieutenant Governor, I just don't want to be a liaison or a sympathetic ear. I want to be an accomplice in the success of all of our communities. When our cities and towns are working and working well, our Commonwealth is thriving, and I think the Lieutenant Governor role can play a major opportunity to make sure that's happening. Thank you.
Senator Lesser.
Thanks so much, Mayor Higgins. It's good to be. Thanks for letting a Longmeadow High grad into Northampton High School. I appreciate being here. Thanks to the Northampton Dems, and I want to thank Elizabeth Silver for putting this event together, and of course all the Northampton Dems. I thought what I'd do is just quickly introduce myself a little bit and explain to you why I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. And I actually wasn't initially from Western Mass. I was born in Queens, New York. My dad grew up in the Sheepshead Bay houses of southern Brooklyn, which is one of the largest public housing projects in New York City. A lot of the people he grew up with, they had their arms covered. They had tattoos on their arm from surviving the Holocaust. My mom, Joan Granucci, grew up in Lower Manhattan in a third-floor walk-up apartment. She shared a bed, not a bedroom, a bed with her grandmother until she was in her mid-20s and moved out. My parents met at New York City College, which was described at the time as the working man's or the working women's Harvard. They paid $54 a semester. My family moved to Longmeadow, to Western Mass, your neighbor, because at the time that's where the jobs were and the opportunity was for my family. And the first time I ever got involved in politics, I was in a room quite similar to this. I was 16 years old, and the principal at our high school called us all in for an assembly, lined a whole bunch of teachers up at the front of the room, kind of like this, and told us that they weren't coming back next year because of budget cuts made in the building I now work in. And I remember feeling really angry that 14, 15, and 16-year-olds were asked to pay the price for bad decisions made somewhere else. And I'm running for Lieutenant Governor to invigorate our communities here in Western Mass, to get East-West Rail done, which I hope we're going to talk about tonight. We're on the 20-yard line of getting that project done, to improve the Valley Flyer, make sure the connection to New York City is invigorated and we have more service, and to close the wait lists at our vocational schools and invest in our gateway cities. I'm excited for the conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And last but not least,
was I right to take my mask off? I'm next.
Yeah. Yes, you are.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to the panelists. Thanks, Elizabeth and the city committee for having us, and thanks to all of you for being here, because this is a key moment. I'm convinced of it. It's key for our region and for our Commonwealth, and honestly, I'm excited to work with you and for you to implement the vision that we have for how our region is going to be strong and how we can make a generational step towards equity by region, by race, income, and so much more. I grew up in the Valley, up in Shelburne Falls. The woman who grew up across the street from me is in the audience. Hi, Nicole. And you know, I did spend time down here in Northampton, actually going to playing on baseball teams here because you were so much better. But right now, I'm representing the 52 westernmost municipalities in the Commonwealth, from West Hampton and Williamsburg out to New York. Said another way, go to Bread Euphoria and you're in my district, and you can go all the way to New York from there. And I joke about that, but imagine that. Imagine having that kind of democratic access to one of the highest offices in the land. Someone you know, someone who lives in your region, someone who is going to wake up every single day making sure that my own kid and all of our kids have every opportunity available to them. It's one of the reasons I'm incredibly honored to have the endorsements of all of our local champions, from Senator Comerford and Representative Sabadosa, former Mayor Narkowitz, and Representatives Dom and Blay, Mayor LaChapelle. You know, it's because we imagine the work they could do with a true champion in the Lieutenant Governor's role. It's got me excited. You know, when I was growing up here in nearby, my mom always said, "Look, I want to make sure you know there's more outside of this small town of Buckland." And then I worked for the UN for 10 years in the Middle East, in Iraq, and Jerusalem, and Syria. And then she finally said, hey, enough is enough. You can come back here and start to raise a family or something. And so that's what I've done. My wife is currently a professor at Amherst College, and I'm so excited to get to work. You'll see in the conversation tonight that I've been focused on our region and equity, and I look forward to talking about the details.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go into a set of questions, and each of our candidates have 2 minutes to answer these questions. So I'm going to suggest that you don't applaud. Okay?
Or boo. No booing.
Or
either.
boo.
Yeah.
Do nothing. And so that we can hear as much as we can from these candidates, some of whom have traveled a far way and others who basically across the street. So I'm going to start the questioning with Nancy Cohen.
A lot of people in the public, they don't really know what a lieutenant governor does. And in Massachusetts, we've had several periods when we haven't had one. Nothing terrible happened. Under Deval Patrick, Lieutenant Governor Timothy Murphy resigned midterm, leaving Patrick and the state without one. We didn't have one after Governor Paul Cellucci resigned in 2001 and Jane Swift became acting governor. And when John Kerry, who was the lieutenant governor under Dukakis, was elected to the U.S. Senate and he headed to D.C., his post was left empty. So there are other states that don't even have a lieutenant governor. I assume that each of you believes that we should have one. Why?
And so I'm just going to note that the order now is Senator Hines first, followed by Mayor Driscoll, Brett Barrow, Representative Gavea, and then Eric Lesser, Senator Lesser.
Well, I think in ambiguity, there's opportunity. It's also notoriously undefined, even in the Constitution. And to me, I hope to bring my background in negotiation. I didn't get to it in my opening remarks, but I was involved in conflict negotiations in Iraq, Jerusalem, and Syria, and bringing that convening role to the lieutenant governor's position. I think you can be a true center of gravity for pushing the governor's agenda, and also for pushing our own priorities. And I would put in that list, for example, using the cabinet to promote racial equity. It's a powerful position to be able to say, you, housing secretary, what are you doing to close home ownership gaps by race? Madam Secretary of Education, what are you doing to close higher education gaps by race? And so I think that's one powerful thing. The second is you're chairing the Governor's Council, which has a distinctly judicial function. And I think this is an opportunity to go further on criminal justice reform. I'm hesitating how much to go into this, but we had a horrible incident in Pittsfield recently with a young man who was in a program that I started. After leaving the UN and coming back home, I started a program in Pittsfield for guys getting involved in violence. One of those guys was going through a mental health crisis and was shot by police. He was holding a knife that he was intending self-harm. That is a clear example of some of the changes that we need to take. I want to make sure, and making sure that someone like him has a civilian who they can call. And in many cases, he had someone to call in our program, and when he did, he's made it through his crisis. When he didn't, the wellness check happened, and we saw the result. It's a very clear way that we need to change our criminal justice system. I think in making sure you have, through the process of judicial appointments and other ways, through the Governor's Council, we can really be at the center of that process and understanding who these guys are going to be coming in front of when they go into the courtroom.
Mayor Driscoll.
Thanks for that question. And yes, I do believe the Lieutenant Governor's role is really critical to the Commonwealth's success. What we've seen from the last two administrations, the current one and the one prior, is Lieutenant Governor really took on a lead role working with cities and towns, being that conduit for information, for communication. As mayor, I've been on the front lines, leading COVID response and recovery, addressing our community's housing needs, working to address climate change in Salem and our region, thinking about how we can strengthen public schools. I chair the Salem School Committee. Working on infrastructure projects, we're putting together budgets, working with people arm in arm to operationalize a plan. I think the Lieutenant Governor's role is to work closely with cities and towns, our municipal leaders, where we know there's so much innovation, there's so much good work going on, but oftentimes you lack that close relationship with either resources or technical assistance to actually get the job done in terms of impacting favorably the quality of life, the economic prosperities that exist within our communities. Let's face it, being governor is a big job. There is a lot to tackle. Having a second that is a trusted confidant that not only is chairing the local government advisory council and the governor's council, but is working hand in hand with our 351 cities and towns to understand what their needs are, to better prepare the state and be a bridge for resources. As we enter this next phase of the pandemic, I don't think we're going back to the way things were. We're going to have an opportunity to operationalize new plans, to think more deeply about how we can address the needs of every corner of this Commonwealth, including the Rural Rescue Plan that talks about the needs of Western Mass and our rural communities. There's an opportunity right there for the Lieutenant Governor to be the rural affairs champion, to ensure that we're thinking about a thriving Commonwealth through the lens and through the eyes of what's impacting cities and towns. The government that we have is the government that we rely on to deliver services at the local level. As Lieutenant Governor, I think I can play a meaningful role, be a key partner to our local cities and towns, while also impacting the state agenda in a positive way. Cities are a microcosm of exactly what we're facing at the state. Affordable housing issues, education challenges, working on climate change and transportation. I can't think of better experience to partner with our governor and ensure that all corners of the Commonwealth see that economic prosperity.
Thank you. Mr. Bear.
Thank you. So I do think that, as my friends have mentioned, that it's not a glitch but a feature that the fact that the Lieutenant Governor's role is slightly ill-defined. And that's because it allows us to match the need of the Commonwealth at that moment with the candidate and the person that we put into that role. I do see two key roles for the Lieutenant Governor. The first is working with our communities, our cities and towns, particularly our forgotten cities and towns. And the key to doing that is being out in the field, because we can never know the issues as well as those who are in the community know the issues. Our job is not to do it to you, but to do it with you, to actually learn from you and figure out what the key issues are so that we can move forward with the programs that your community, not only your elected leaders and your governmental town employees, but also your community business leaders, et cetera, think are important for that community. The second reason is I see a coming economic storm. Inflation is up significantly. You've all filled your car with gas and you see the price increases, and you also see inflation in other areas. Interest rates are heading up, and global money center banks are forecasting a recession in 2023. I think it's critically important that we have somebody in the Commonwealth who understands what it takes to help small businesses succeed, because small businesses employ 45% of our workforce. And so to me, the answer that we have to have is someone who can address the needs that we have at the moment. And I see those needs as being largely driven in addressing the problems that were created by the pandemic and the problems that are going to be created moving forward with the coming economic storm. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Lesser.
Well, thank you so much. There's two main points I'd like to kind of make.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Oh, I was wondering. Okay, go ahead.
I'm just going to go with it.
Go ahead.
Thank you, colleague. So I appreciate this question. It's one that we certainly get asked some variation of every single day on the trail. I believe that we are facing such complex problems in our state that it's critical that the Lieutenant Governor have the skills and the values and the mindset to get down to the root causes of those complex problems. This is something I've done throughout my career as a public health social worker. In the role of Lieutenant Governor, within my first 100 days, I would like to partner with the governor to form 5 working groups to really focus on the key issues that I have been hearing since entering this race in June of last year. Those 5 issues are, of course, our COVID response and recovery, ensuring that our response and recovery is just and equitable, making sure that we are increasing housing affordability. But what I see over and over again, and I've lived through this myself as a single mom, is that we also have to have the conversation about investing in housing so that it is humane and fit for places for people to live. The third issue that I think is so critical, and again, I hear this every single day, and I'm sure you are seeing this in your own families and certainly here in Northampton, the impacts of mental health on our young people, on our working parents, and on our aging seniors. This is something that we have not made enough investments in, and we are living with the consequences of those underinvestments. The fourth issue that I think is so critical, of course, is our climate crisis and putting racial and economic justice at the center of the ways that we are responding to the climate crisis. And the fifth issue that I think is so critical, of course, is investing in our education system, and that must include early childhood care. The other issue that I see with the Governor's Council that I think is an opportunity is to make sure we are appointing judges and people to the parole board who understand childhood trauma, the role of structural racism and intergenerational poverty on those who do become involved in the criminal legal system. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Senator Lesser.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? No? Now? Okay. Thank you so much. So just a couple things to respond to that, because it is an important question. First, the job of Lieutenant Governor, it's important to be honest about what the job is. You are derivative of the governor, and you are meant to be a partner to the governor and to help make sure that the governor's agenda and our collective democratic and progressive agenda is a success. And I think the set of skills I bring to the table will make me the right partner to our next governor. It's very important in a state where the economic, political, population center is concentrated in one place to have geographic perspective, to have that perspective of Western Mass. You've seen the transformative impact in Worcester of having two successive two-term lieutenant governors from Worcester County and the work that's happened there. For example, to unlock rail service, which was a project that Tim Murray championed, largely working, of course, with Governor Patrick after receiving money from the Obama stimulus in 2009. We have a similar set of circumstances now, with more than $9 billion in infrastructure money coming from the Biden infrastructure plan alone. I think the high-level federal experience I have, having worked for President Obama for 4 years, working as the assistant to David Axelrod in the first 2 years of the Obama administration, are going to make me that partner to help bring that federal money back and get the shovels into the ground. And the final point I just want to make is about the Governor's Council, which is a very important and very specific constitutional obligation of the Lieutenant Governor. I'm the Vice Chair of the Senate's Judiciary Committee. I was the co-author, and I worked with Bill on this legislation to do police reform last year after the murder of George Floyd, and mandatory minimum reform, wiping away most nonviolent drug possession mandatory minimums in 2018. And I worked on 2 Supreme Court nominations when I worked for President Obama, for Sonia Sotomayor and for Elena Kagan. So I think I offer the right perspective to be of use to the governor in chairing the Governor's Council. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question will be posed by journalist Bill Newman.
As Senator Hines just pointed out, recently in Pittsfield, a young man, age 22, was shot and killed by the police. Also recently in Springfield, another young man, age 23, was shot and killed by the police. I'm not asking you to make a judgment here tonight on either of those specific incidents or response unless you care to, but I do wish to pose a question regarding the larger issue of alternatives to armed police response to 911 calls. This issue has received the focus and attention of local governments throughout Western Massachusetts, cities and towns. Some of those programs are based on an unarmed civilian response model. Others utilize a dual response or hybrid model. My question or related questions are, what role do you believe the state should play in creating and implementing such programs and establishing standards and best practices? Do you envision the necessity for legislation? And have you been advocating on behalf of the ACES Act, which Senator Chang Diaz referenced earlier in this program?
The first person to answer this question is Mayor Driscoll.
Thank you very much for that question, and I think we're at a point in time in our Commonwealth where these are exactly the questions we need to be asking folks who are running for office. I can talk to you a little bit about my experience in Salem and why I think it's really critical that we think about how our police departments can embed mental health services, whether it's through an unarmed response unit or embedding mental health clinicians within their various police departments. In Salem, we were early adopters of that model and now have 2 full-time mental health clinicians working with our police department. That's invaluable for 2 reasons. One, the training that goes in day to day, the additional training we're able to provide for our police officers on how to address the mental health needs of our constituents. And I should point out that Salem is a gateway city, very diverse population. We have a homeless shelter, we have a day center. We work really hard to ensure the most vulnerable members of our community feel supported, respected, and have the services that they need. But there are times when a 911 call goes out, and we want to make sure our police officers that are responding are trained and have an adequate way of addressing the needs of this vulnerable population. In my estimation, working closely with local leaders who are interested in pilot programs. I know right next door in our city of Lynn, they are looking at an unarmed response unit. There are a number of demonstration projects that I think the state could help fund when there are willing partners. That includes both the municipality, nonprofit partners to work with them to ensure that we're thinking about a response that's going to be timely and meet the needs of the community. I do feel like the recent criminal justice reform post bill provides an opportunity for us to deliver more accountability within our local law enforcement departments, ensuring that they not only have the adequate training, but the accountability when something goes wrong to make sure that we're not only aware of it and tracking that, but understanding what we can do to prevent it and hold the particular individuals responsible for it as we move forward. In this role as Lieutenant Governor, I'd love to work with communities who are interested in that innovation, bringing those efforts to bear. And I think you can really be a convener. Where are those key partners? It's important that you're working with individuals and organizations that want to do this effort and have the expertise and abilities to do so.
Mr. Barrow.
Thank you. As somebody who served on the board of one of the leading addiction and trauma recovery centers, I think the important question to ask first is, why does the situation occur? Why does the person need help? Often it's because of trauma that that individual is going through. What they don't need at that moment in time is an armed response. Even a response from police when they're not presenting with weapons. What they need is compassion and help, because it is a mental problem, a mental challenge they're having at that moment, or a trauma that they're having. And so you have to look at first, why is it occurring? And then how well have we trained the responders to deal with that situation? We appropriately train the police to respond to the traditional challenges that police have had to respond to. We haven't provided enough training for responders to mental health problems. And in fact, I'm not sure that that's what we want to train the police for. I think that we should have, in the case of nonviolent trauma, we should have response teams that include more than just the police, so that the people can be talked off the ledge and be given the help that they need. It's always a tragedy when somebody calls the police and the result is that they lose their loved one. It leads to a case where they stop calling the police because they need their loved ones to survive. So I think we have to look at how we do this, and then I think we have to look broader to the question of, well, why is the trauma presenting, and get those people help before the situation presents. Obviously easier said than done, but it gets to the larger challenge of how do we promote our communities and safety within the communities. Thank you.
Representative Gouveia.
Great. Thank you for the question. And sorry for the tragedies that continue to happen because of the over-policing of a lot of our communities of color specifically. I believe that every resident in our state deserves to live in a thriving, flourishing, and safe neighborhood and safe communities, regardless of your zip code. I do recognize that there is a need for greater investment in our mental health care system. We know that our schools, our police departments, our hospitals are all clamoring for more social workers, more mental health care workers. So we have to really take a deep look at making those investments to also support these efforts that I know Rep. Sabadosa, who's here with us, also co-filed the ACEs bill. It is something that I have supported in written letters in support of as well, because I do believe that it's important that we have appropriate response to the challenges that some of our families are facing every single day, and police are not the appropriate response. Whether you're talking about a child with autism, or you're talking about someone with mental health issues, or you're talking about even a senior with dementia and who might be wandering around. So I think it's critical that we acknowledge that there are other systems that are also impacting what's happening on the ground, with police being called to respond. The police reform legislation that we passed last session was a really important first step, but we have to acknowledge that racism persists here in our state. Classism persists here in our state. We have to get a handle on those issues, as they also relate to the over-policing and over-incarceration of particularly black men, black and brown men and immigrants in our communities. I believe that we need to have greater investments in things like Medicare for all, investments in jobs, educational opportunities, and making sure that people have access to the resources that they need to get through the day, including having their physiological needs met, like housing and nutritious food. So we have to really have a big mindset towards solving this problem. It's not just one area, it's really complex, and that's why I've supported the ACES bill and will support other measures to make those critical investments. Thank you.
Senator Lesser.
Well, thank you for the question, Bill, and I want to be careful to answer the specific question you asked, because it's a big, obviously a very big topic. So, on the topic of trained, essentially creating an unarmed response, or more of a social service response to police calls and to 911 calls and to general kind of engagements and other distress calls. I know Northampton's been working on this and has been working to set up programs here. I've been an advocate and have fought for funding for those communities to do that work, and will continue to in the budget that's coming up that the House is going to be doing in a few weeks and the Senate's going to be doing in May. I was a co-author of the Post bill that was mentioned, and worked closely with the ACLU, including the ACLU of Western Mass, on those issues. And I've been very involved in the response to the Springfield DOJ report and to the work to do to reform the police department in Springfield, but frankly not only in Springfield, in all of our communities across the Commonwealth. And here's specifically where I think a lieutenant governor can play a very important role. Aside from the governor, the lieutenant governor is really the only person in state government that can work across disciplines to convene and bring various people and various stakeholders together. And that is really at the heart of what this issue is about. I've done work in Springfield and in Hampden County with, for example, CHD. Many of you have probably been familiar with CHD, to work on having, for example, social workers and health service and human service workers partnering with the police to respond to calls together. As Lieutenant Governor, I would convene EOPS, our EOPS secretary, our HHS and DPH officials, and our local officials, our local police and our local mayors and police chiefs on a cross-disciplinary response to this issue. And we have to fund it. We can't mandate this on communities without the state stepping in and funding it. And that's also a role a lieutenant governor can play in advocating for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator.
So his name was Miguel Estrella, the 22-year-old in Pittsfield. And I want to take a minute to talk about him, because he was doing everything right, everything that was asked of him. In this program that I started, used state funding. It was the SSYI, Safe and Successful Youth Initiative and Shannon Grant. And it was deliberately saying, you need to have mental health services, you need to have access to jobs, you need to have mentorship, and you need to have education support. Guess what? He went and got his GED. He wanted to be an electrician. He was getting certified. He had a job. He just got an apartment. He started working out. He was doing everything we asked of him. And the program, and I'll repeat this, there were outreach workers that allowed him, he gave him and his girlfriend someone to call when he was going through a mental health crisis. And on 3 previous occasions, they were there to answer the phone and saved his life. And that night, 2 Fridays ago, the outreach workers were not available. And that's why the police went to his apartment. And it is such a stark example of why you need, in the first instance, someone who has the training and maybe doesn't have a gun on their side. Such a stark example. So I immediately, of course, went to the new state use of force regulations, the part of the police reform bill. They were just finalized in October of last year. Those need to be improved. This example shows why those need to be improved. It also points to the fact that the use and availability, God, I'm going on way too long. Use and availability of non-lethal tools need to be made available. That's clearly one area where the state can provide funding. I definitely support ACES. I'm a co-sponsor. It's a clear example. I love what Northampton and Amherst are doing to make sure that it's not a co-responder, but it's a separate response. When you call 911, they can make the choice. That's an important piece here. I'll end right there. Thanks.
Thank you. We could probably go on for a while on this topic. Yeah. Mr. Crowley.
Thank you. We've had a number of questions about climate change from the public, too many to ask tonight, but I just want to give you a flavor of some of them. What plans do you have for allowing forests, farms, and wetlands to store carbon and help meet the state's net zero emissions goal? Would you support a call for an end to logging on public lands as a response to the climate crisis? Are you committed to halting all new fossil fuel infrastructure, including natural gas pipelines and gas-generated peaker plants? Given all those, what is your position on fossil fuel infrastructure and meeting the state's energy needs? And secondly, can you talk a little bit about any work you've done to address the climate crisis?
And we're starting with you.
Thank you. So when I go out on the campaign trail and I talk to people, everybody under 30 will tell you that climate change is the existential issue for them. They recognize that the planet cannot go on. You just look at the news every day and you can see that our dependence on fossil fuels is having a significant and adverse impact on the planet. So we have to get off fossil fuels. We have to get off fossil fuels. We know that the leading cause of climate change in Massachusetts is transportation. We know that there's a whole bunch of policies, including some that are spearheaded by Senator Lesser on East-West Rail, for example, that would help address that. It's not just East-West Rail. Regional transportation, public transportation in general is critical. On top of that, we have to then get electronic vehicles out there. There's 38,000 electronic vehicles in the Commonwealth. Mine's in the parking lot. If we're going to lead on climate change, then each of us has to do our own part to do something. And sometimes that's going to cost us more money, but we cannot wait because it is an investment, not an expense. It is an investment in our future. Offshore wind and alternative energies are a great opportunity for Massachusetts to become a leader in this climate change battle and in the alternative energy sector. We need to do more because we can't wait. It truly is an existential issue. And so the issue for me is both from a state level, what are we going to do? How do we hold people accountable? I served on the board of the largest environmental testing company in North America, and we held BP responsible for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So I do know how to hold people responsible, and I know how to take action individually. And I think we're going to need to do it both at the state level and at the individual level if we're really going to address this issue. Thank you.
Representative Correa.
Great. Thank you for the question. When I first ran for state representative a little over 3 years ago, the two issues that I ran on were climate change and transportation because I see how intertwined they really are. As a parent, there were times I wanted to take the train. It didn't operate in the late afternoon, so I wasn't able to use that as an option. Transportation is such an incredible barrier all across our Commonwealth. We know our rural areas, it's even more challenging. So we have to, of course, invest in commuter rail, both east-west as well as north-south, to make it easier for our working families to take transportation. It's why in the State House last session, just before COVID hit, I led 2 working groups to make investments in our transportation system, to green it and to make it more reliable and more affordable, and also to create options around microtransit to make it easier for people to get access to the services that they need, to get to work, to get to healthcare appointments, to take their kids to school. The other issue related to climate change that I'd like to highlight as a state representative, I was able to pass the Net Zero Stretch Energy Code language that made it into the roadmap bill that we are rolling out right now. And when I first filed that legislation last session, I was told that there was no way that the State House was going to pass legislation addressing buildings as a source of greenhouse gas emissions. Through our collective efforts, through a lot of advocates, probably right here in this room and certainly all across the Commonwealth, we were able to get buildings addressed as a source of greenhouse gas emissions. It's a good first start. There's a lot more for us to do. It's why I filed legislation with Senator Jamie Eldridge to allow our municipalities to pass local ordinances and bylaws that allow them to say no new fossil fuel hookups. So I know the question was around, do we support new fossil fuel infrastructure? I think all that we can do to make sure that we are moving quickly towards, full net zero in our Commonwealth and not having new fossil fuel hookups and new fossil fuel infrastructure is the way we need to go. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the question, Dan. And yes, I do support no new fossil fuel hookups. In fact, we're going to be voting on that on Thursday in the Senate, so people can check the receipts on that. But we're going to be having a vote on that this week. Just a couple of thoughts about this very urgent topic, which would be a chief priority, really the priority as Lieutenant Governor. First, as Rep. Gouveia and Brett and Mr. Barrow mentioned, more than 40% of our emissions in Massachusetts come from transportation. Overwhelmingly, that comes from cars. The Boston Globe just did a big special on how short we are in terms of electronic vehicle hookups. We need to do a lot more on EV hookups, but we also need to do a lot more on mass transit. EVs are a very important part, but we also need to bring people out of cars and especially integrate high-speed rail into our state. I am committed to connecting our state, ultimately Albany, Boston. We're going to do Pittsfield, Springfield, Worcester, Boston before that, to connect our state by high-speed rail. This would be our Green New Deal. This would take thousands of cars off the road. It would clean our air. The Pioneer Valley, where we are, several years ago was ranked one of the worst places in the country for asthma. Springfield has one of the worst asthma rates in the entire country, and that includes the whole I-91 corridor, by the way. We have got to reduce emissions by investing in transit. The final thing I just want to bring up, which often doesn't get discussed, and I know we're short on time, is the component of voc ed and the trades. We don't have nearly enough electricians, carpenters, HVAC technicians, metal workers to build the wind turbines, install the solar panels, to do the energy retrofits that we need. So we need to close the wait list at our voc schools, invest in the trades, and make sure that we're producing a workforce that's paid well to do this work. That's going to be the key for us to getting this done.
I think I'd have the sequence down by now, but hey. So this is near and dear to my heart. As the senator for the largest legislative district in the Commonwealth, I'm willing to bet I have the most trees and as well. The district is bigger than Rhode Island in terms of square miles. And so as a result, I've filed numerous bills to promote natural carbon sequestration. It's not just about reducing our emissions, it's also about capturing that carbon. And so one of my bills, in fact, is incentivizing folks to keep trees on their land. So that's a big one that we're going to be fighting for. I filed it as an amendment to the climate bill we're taking up this week. I think, let's allow folks to not only gain income, but really be incentivized to not chop down trees. I've also filed a bill to put a moratorium on logging on state-owned land. So this is precisely the strategies I've pursued to shift how we're going about this in Massachusetts, along with several others related to old growth forests, which we actually have in Cummington and elsewhere. Fossil fuel infrastructure, I also filed a bill that was passed by the Senate, didn't make it out of conference in the Next Gen report related to DPU filings and who has standing. And so I'm filing it again, or I filed it again as an amendment to this climate bill, which says that groups of 10 or more would have standing when a pipeline is proposed for their community, or an elected official in the impacted community. Obviously, I don't need to tell this group that with the Ned Pipeline and others, we encountered a major problem. In my district, there was a pipeline extension from Connecticut. Had no business in serving anyone in Massachusetts, and that was overruled. Our conservation, our Constitution, Article 97 was overruled because of federal preemption. We've got a big problem with our infrastructure. The electric vehicles piece is a big one. It's my bill that's a part of the climate omnibus bill that says by 2035 and after, every new car in Massachusetts that's bought has to be electric. The good news is consumers and the industry are going there. It's 13 years from now, so we have some time to get there to make sure we're reducing costs. But the industry, including GMC, has said that's where they're going to go. All their cars are going to be green by then. That's how we start to make the big impact and making sure that it's affordable for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much for this question. I think it's pretty clear Massachusetts is not acting deep enough or fast enough with regard to tackling the climate change crisis. In my mind, I think every community needs a climate action plan. The city of Salem has one. We did it with our community next door, the city of Beverly. It's important for two reasons. One, it tells you where your greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. It does an assessment. To no one's surprise, they're coming from our buildings and our transportation. That's cars. That's the way we're using public transportation currently. It also provides a to-do list, a real action plan, policy initiatives you can take, net zero building, green building ordinances, adaptation measures, mitigation measures. It happens on the ground. We are not going to tackle the climate change crisis in Massachusetts without actions in cities and towns, and every city and town needs their own climate action plan, working in concert with the state government, both with policies and resources. Some of the things that we're doing in my community that I think can be emulated in lots of places. Salem, we're 8 square miles. We want to be a car light or a car optional place. We've taken resources to put in place a car share. We subsidize the cars. They're available for anyone to use, low hourly rate. A ride share service using an Uber platform. Started out as an age-friendly initiative. It has now had over 43,000 rides serving kids and young adults and older adults in our community. Why that's important? Most of us are going to outlive our ability to drive. We need other ways to get around. As much as we love public transportation, Salem has the busiest commuter rail stop in the system, #1 in ridership. Not everyone is going back and forth between Boston. We definitely need West-East Rail for a lot of reasons. Climate change among them, opportunities among them. But many of us travel in and around our communities and adjacent communities. We also need to improve that public transportation. Looking at the stretch code, green communities, we were an early adopter of that. There are ways that we have already tackled some of the low-hanging fruit. Municipal aggregation, 100% renewable energy. Many communities have involved that already. There is innovation happening at the local level. We need to harness that power. As Lieutenant Governor, I hope to work with our cities and towns to tackle that. And I say that as a community that had a coal-fired plant, one of the Filthy Five, that was converted to a quick start natural gas facility and is about to become the hub of offshore wind for the entire Commonwealth. We can do this. Our grandkids are going to ask us, what did we do to fight climate change? And right now, we need better answers.
Thank you. So I think we're back to you, Nancy Cohen.
So being a leader in good times is one thing, but providing leadership during a crisis is another. Past 2 years, our public school teachers, students, and their parents have gone through a lot. It's been tough. Thinking about today, if you were Lieutenant Governor today, right now, are there policies related to COVID-19 that you would initiate or support in our public schools this year? COVID isn't gone yet. In fact, this month, there is an elementary school in Franklin County that has had a big outbreak, and they've had to respond to it locally. Who should make decisions about safety measures in the schools when things are okay or when there's an outbreak? And what would those decisions be based on?
Representative Gouveia.
Well, thank you for this question. As a mom, I saw it firsthand. I have a 17-year-old, so he was at home doing remote learning through much of the pandemic. So I understand the impacts that it's had personally and all across the Commonwealth for our students. When Governor Baker started to try to respond, I should say, to the COVID-19 pandemic, I was left feeling frustrated on a very regular daily basis, as many of you probably were, watching our seniors struggle to get access to a vaccine appointment, being told that they needed to go far away to get a vaccine at a mass vaccination site. And then when it came to rapid testing, leaving us all to scramble to try to fight to go to our local grocery store or our local pharmacy to get access to a rapid test. I anticipated these challenges based on my background as a doctor of public health, and I had been advocating repeatedly for investments in rapid tests to make sure that every family in our Commonwealth had access to those tests, because I could see what was happening in other countries and some of the response that some other countries had. They were using rapid tests to get their students back to school safely, to get their teachers back in the classroom safely, and to get our working families back to their jobs. So that's something that I would have done differently. And also in terms of the vaccinations, by putting the health, well-being, and dignity of our residents at the heart of decision-making, we would not have put up so many barriers with a privatized response to a public health crisis. When it comes to our school buildings, I filed legislation with a colleague of mine in the House, Jim Hawkins, who had been a teacher, and he has told us repeatedly just how many of our school buildings are not safe and not healthy learning environments or teaching environments. So making those investments in our school buildings to ensure that there's proper ventilation, that our teachers and our students have access to the PPEs that they need, and some of the other policies in place are critical, and those are some of the things I would have done differently as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for this question. It's an urgent question, and I appreciate actually you reminding, I don't think we necessarily need a reminder, but the general society about the fact that COVID is not over. And in fact, the numbers are showing an uptick in our state. The Deer Island data, for example, which has been a leading indicator for the state, has shown an uptick in the last few weeks, and we've seen in other regions and also internationally that there is an uptick. So I want to answer this question in two parts. One is the virus itself, and then second, I want to talk about this kind of wraparound supports we really need to surge to our schools right now. First, it is completely unreasonable and unfair the way the Baker administration has basically washed their hands of the hard decision making and has thrown onto local school boards and local communities the judgment calls on these responses. Our local communities, frankly, are not necessarily equipped to do that. Our local boards of health do not necessarily or often do not have the resources to adequately do it. And frankly, it's state government's job and DPH's job to make sure that they're supporting communities, doing the surveillance testing, doing the pool testing, getting the resources out to schools to keep on top of the pandemic. And Rep. Gouveia is right. Governor Baker decided to privatize this response and handed out no-bid contracts to Curative. People remember the Eastfield Mall fiasco where seniors were waiting in the snow. I went and visited, that's in my district, I went to visit them. We've got to reinvigorate and reinvest in our public health infrastructure. And I just want to quickly address also, we have got to surge social and emotional supports to our schools for the workforce, the teachers and the staffs in our schools who are burned out, and for the kids who have been through a lot. I've got an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 1-year-old. I've seen with my young children, all of our kids, we've all seen this in our families, what the pandemic and what the trauma of it all has meant and done to them. We've got to get more social workers, more mental health support, more social and emotional support into the schools, and the state needs to do that. It can't just be on the local districts.
Yeah, it's one of these things that it's going to be a shotgun approach, right? And so I'll start with what our experience was and what was wrong with it. You've heard already, it was one of the more frustrating experiences of my time in the Senate to constantly playing catch up. The administration would make one decision, but it was because it was a federally required. To make another decision because there was a lot of pressure from the Mass Teachers Association. Make another decision. It was always late and it was always short. And so that's one thing that we've certainly learned. I think when it comes to the specific decisions in the classroom and in the school, we know in general the three things that work, right? It's testing, it's PPE, it's vaccinations, and so making sure that we have the money and the resources in every school to make sure that testing and PPE is available, just as a starter. Really serious investments in ventilation. That's a good thing during a pandemic, it's a good thing outside of a time of a pandemic for our students, and making sure that the MSBA, the Mass Building Authority, has more resources than ever for that. I would say that when you're making these decisions, obviously it's DPH and it's the experts. It's also making sure that, again, this is possibly the convening role of an LG, working with the MTA, working with parents, and making sure that we have an environment where the kids are safe and growing. this is one of the top issues that I hear about today, which is what are we going to do to sustain the mental health of our students and all that they've gone through, and making sure that we're recovering in as strong a way as possible. And yet we know that, again, the resources are barely there in our communities for mental health professionals. And so we've taken steps in the Senate and the legislature to make sure we're growing that workforce. We can talk about that later. And then just the final point, because I'm out of time, is reforming our boards of health. I believe no other state has a separate board of health for every single town and city in the Commonwealth. And there are clearly now better ways to do that. And there are efforts ongoing, including by Senator Comerford, to reform and improve and strengthen our local health responses.
Thank you.
I'm forgetting the order too. I think I'm next, right?
You're always after.
You know, I think COVID response and recovery was one of the most difficult challenges that local leaders faced. As mayor and chair of the school committee, you were put in a position of managing risk for others. And we tried to lead with science and data. Salem was one of the early adopters of pooled testing. We thought that was the most important thing we could do, along with building upgrades, infrastructure improvements with ventilation, protocols, all the mitigation measures, masking, a key mitigation measure. But we also needed to make sure that we were looking at pooled testing. We were one of 3 districts in the entire Commonwealth that was looking at pooled testing, and we were paying for it at that time. That was before there was any federal funding available, but we thought it was critical to keep kids in school. And in a district like mine, lots of working families, they didn't have options. Everyone did everything they could. The incredible esprit de corps that you saw across communities in the Commonwealth, with everyone pivoting on the dime to help our kids, make sure they were fed, get computers out the door, make sure we pivoted on a dime to embrace virtual learning. Things that you do during a pandemic. But it's no way to continue a process and sustain it over time. As a leader, we've had to be prepared for the unexpected, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, a bit of a roller coaster ride, and prepare our constituents for that. Again, being led by science and data. It did feel quite lonely at times. We have world-class epidemiologists and researchers. I led a local panel involving local mayors and managers across the state so we could have access to Dr. Rochelle Walensky, Dr. Paul Bittinger, people that we're seeing on CNN who are in meaningful positions that helped us craft policies and programs to get through this pandemic. As we move forward, we need that same esprit de corps. Our kids are hurting. Our staff and principals and administrators look like they just stormed Normandy. Now more than ever, we need to do something different in September. Our kids weren't all being served well through their education process before COVID. Going forward, we have academic gaps, we have social and emotional trauma. It's not going to be solved in a year. There's an opportunity for the Lieutenant Governor to be a convener. We need DESE to be a partner, not an auditor in this effort, to look at how we're going to serve kids. Does the schedule change? Do we look at virtual learning as a potential opportunity? Do we think about what our students are telling us, their engagement, their ability to have interpersonal skills? There's a lot we can do in this space. As Lieutenant Governor, I hope to play a meaningful role.
Thank you for the question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this question because I have spent 6 years in the classroom, 3 of which were in COVID, and my wife is an occupational therapist in one of our school districts in the state. And so I approach the problem from somebody who has dealt with it from being in the classroom. Obviously, a lot of the things that we've already talked about, pool testing, masking when pool testing requires it, individual testing, all make sense. Ventilation, sure. And we can look at what we did wrong in the past. Things like saying, for example, you have to have 6 feet separation in a store, but only 3 feet in a school. And saying, well, you know, kids are too young to wear masks, so we'll try to get them to wear masks, but if they don't, just do the best you can. And then we also talk about the fact that we didn't make teachers part of the equivalent of first responders when it came time to get vaccinations. So if we're going to take some time to learn the lessons and not focus on the past, but what we need to do going forward, then we have to talk about how do we promote education under an environment that it might be remote or it might be in person. I watched my wife try to work with students that were on individual education plans in the special education field, trying to help them learn via Zoom. It's incredibly difficult to do. She went out and bought some of the materials herself because she couldn't get access to them. She needed to get a camera to make it work for them. We don't really provide enough support for the teachers because we don't ask the teachers, what do you need to be successful? Teaching is a calling. It's not just a profession, and we need to invest more in it. And we need to understand that right now we're at danger of losing 50% of our teachers to other careers because they're burned out. And so we need to do a better job at doing things like providing substitute teachers to help them when they are sick themselves. In a nutshell, education is our future. We need to invest in it. We need to learn the lessons. And the key thing is we need to ask the teachers what needs to be done.
So I'm going to, we had hoped to end around 8:40. I think I'm going to try to have these next two questions and then wrap up with the closing remarks. We'll run a little bit late, but we started a little bit late. Okay? So the next question goes to Mr. Newman, and the first person to answer is Senator Lesser.
So I'd like to just turn the kaleidoscope a bit on some of the words that you all used to answer the last question from Nancy Cohen. Schools, testing, investments, learning, data, classrooms, teachers, lessons. And I want to ask a question about high-stakes testing and specifically MCAS, which have been subject, of course, to intense debate for many years. And what I would like to know is your position with regard to MCAS and high-stakes testing. And if not MCAS, then what do you believe should be the metric for ensuring the effectiveness of our schools?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Bill. Ironically, my daughter just took MCAS last week, so timely question. So I've been a supporter consistently in the legislature of the moratorium language to pause, moratorium legislation to pause high-stake testing in our Commonwealth. Look, I think our Commonwealth has gotten way out of balance in terms of how we structure our schools. We, of course, need standards. We, of course, want to make sure that our kids are learning and are staying on track. But it's got to be in balance, and we've lost the balance in our schools. A couple of things I've been particularly passionate about that I think our K-12 system has fallen short on is, for example, teaching civics. We champion legislation, and the legislators at this table all supported this legislation that I co-authored with Harriet Chandler from Worcester to bring civics back, including a volunteer program and an in-person kind of community service element to our school curriculums that used to be in school curriculums and got pushed out as a result of MCAS. Another thing that I'm very passionate about, I think we need to do a much better job on, is the trades, vocational education, and apprenticeships in our schools. We have shortages, dramatic shortages, and these jobs pay very well. We're in the Pioneer Valley, which is one of the global centers for precision machining, just as an example. Up and down the Connecticut River, we have iconic precision machining manufacturers. These jobs pay $30, $35, $40 an hour to start. And our training centers in our schools aren't giving kids pathways into those options. So I feel strongly that, of course, we've got to have some level of standards, some level of metrics. We've got to make sure kids who want to go to college are prepared to go to college, but we've also got to make sure we're not losing sight of the broader obligation of our public schools, which is to create good citizens and people who are ready to participate in society after they graduate. And MCAS has often been an impediment to that.
Yeah, so I also do not believe in high-stakes testing, and have also co-sponsored the legislation to create a moratorium. And it's pretty clear why. I mean, we've seen that testing like this is merely a reflection of the socioeconomic status of the census tracts involved. And so there's your answer for what you need to do. Elevate resources to those kind of census tracts that have challenges from an economic perspective and the like. And so we've seen then what's used as the criteria for deciding how the state intervenes, and, for example, go to a receivership, as we're seeing a discussion now in Boston. And so the criteria that's being used is flawed. And then the conclusion is, and therefore we need to take away local democratic control. when really what we're talking about is the need for more resources. And so part of that is what we did with the Student Opportunity Act to say, look, we need more resources for schools with English learning students, more English learning students, with lower income students, with more special needs. That's the way we get there. And by the way, we don't have a guarantee that the legislature is going to stand up for the $1.5 billion that we call for in the Student Opportunity Act over 7 years. So that's a big thing that we need to keep our eyes on and keep focused on. And so for me, that's been one function. I want to just say I'm the son of a school teacher. My dad was a teacher and a coach up at Mohawk, and my mom was down the hall in the library. And that was one of the reasons my priority in the legislature has been on education, because I've seen that in our region, there is very clear disparities because of declining or low enrollment in our schools. So I created a new line item in the state budget specifically for these schools that really are heavily focused out here because we've seen that we have unique circumstances and challenges in Western Mass, and so that'll continue to be a focus of mine as Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks for this question. You know, I remember my oldest daughter, Delaney, taking MCAS her first year, 3rd grade, and was in a rush to get to school that morning and said, "Mom, you don't understand. This is the most important day of my life." Right? Nuts. You know, I really do think we need an accountability measure. As a district, as I said, Gateway City, ELL, we have English language learners, we have economically disadvantaged students. If we don't have some kind of accountability measure, I worry about those students falling through cracks, us not serving them well. We know that can happen even in districts that really work hard to try and prevent that. But having it be more of an internal facing tool. MCAS was not designed to put a scarlet letter on a district or determine what level you were at and how well you were performing. It was supposed to be an accountability measure so we could get better. But the way it's been implemented, from one grade to the next, you're not really tracking that level of improvement in a way that's going to foster, changes for the next grade level. What it started out as an idea for accountability is good. Where it is right now is not working. As a parent of 3 children, I much rather know what type of offerings do you have in school? Are my kids getting art and music and phys ed? Do they have options for language? When they get to high school, is there a program of studies that's broad and robust and meets their interests? The amount of time and energy we put in to MCAS testing, as opposed to expanding pre-K that actually would help MCAS testing, to early college and career pathways for our students. We know our young adults want those experiences. They're telling us that. We need an accountability measure that's internal. We need to make sure as we think about how best to serve students, we have teachers and educators involved in that discussion. No teacher serves on the Board of Education in Massachusetts. They're not permitted to. Have you ever heard of such a thing? There's an opportunity for us to take all of the innovation, the strengths that we have in the Commonwealth with a lot of brain matter, and put it to use to make sure our students who need the most services are getting it. It shouldn't begin and start with MCAS. We can do better.
Look, I get it. Parents want to ensure that their students, their kids, are getting prepared for the future. And yet, I would also tell you that the challenge is not the test itself, it's what we do with the test. And that's where the real issue is that I have. So what is the purpose of schools? It is to prepare our next generation for the future. My wife will tell you that focusing on high-stakes testing limits learning. It doesn't promote it. It limits it because the teachers start teaching to the test. And when they teach to the test, our scores go up, but our learning goes down a little bit. Now, I do think we need to be able to track how well our schools are doing. So I don't think the issue is having the test, it's the importance we put on it. When we talk about education, it's not just MCAS at the high school level and your ability to get a diploma. We need to focus on things like pre-K. We need to focus on things like vocational schools. We also, by the way, need to focus on things like community colleges and our state university system, because learning isn't occurring just while you're in the classroom. It's occurring all the time and later in life. We know that many people will go back for certificates and advanced degrees and just their basic GED, or conversely, a college degree later in life. And so the challenge for us is to make sure that whatever mechanism we use is ensuring that our schools are performing. MCAS should give us some ideas about where to focus on. It should not be a high-stakes test for whether a student can graduate high school with a diploma or not.
Thank you for the question. So as I shared with you in my introductory remarks, I grew up in the city of Lowell, and 14 years ago or so, I moved to the town of Acton. So that's how I represent the 14th Middlesex of Acton, Concord, Carlisle, and Chelmsford. Very wealthy, suburban, predominantly white districts. And one of the things that I have learned as we were passing the Student Opportunity Act last session is that students in Lowell are getting their cast-off books from Concord Carlisle. So the place where I grew up is getting hand-me-downs from the place that I now represent. It's a reflection of the privilege that I have, but as I also shared in my introductory remarks, not every single family is set up to succeed and to have the opportunities that I had handed to me as a privileged person. And so when I think about the issue around MCAS, I think about the access to educational opportunities and whether or not they're equitable and just. And we know the answer is that it's not. That's why we set out to make those investments and to rejigger the formula for our education funding. But there's so much more that we need to and can and should be doing. Not every single school district has universal kindergarten. And we need to move towards ensuring that every student has access to universal pre-K so that every family's children are set up to succeed and to have access to those educational opportunities. So I have supported legislation for, getting rid of MCAS as a high-stakes test requirement for graduation. But I think in addition to these investments, the other people we should be bringing to the table as we're talking about what's needed is our business community, to make sure that we are preparing students for 21st century work with 21st century education that is really meeting those needs, to prepare our students as citizens of the world, and to prepare them for the kinds of complex problems that we are going to need them to be able to solve once we're done trying to do all that we can to address the issues that we've been discussing here tonight.
Thank you. So, Dan, you have the last question.
Final question? Okay. It's a question about agriculture. Agricultural businesses can pay farm workers a poverty level wage of $8 an hour, well below the state's minimum wage of $14.25, and are not subject to the state's overtime laws. Some research has found that farm workers experience poverty at twice the rate of all workers, and that the exclusion of farm workers from the state's minimum wage law is a legacy of structural racism. The Fairness for Farm Workers Act would reform wage and hour laws for all Massachusetts farm workers, extending wage equity and the ability to earn overtime pay for seasonal farm workers, as well as guaranteeing them a day of rest if they choose. Do you support this legislation, and if so, explain why? And I know there's one, maybe two people here that are involved with it. For you, what is it going to take to get this type of legislation passed?
Senator Hines, I think you're starting this time.
Bill, you made sure this one was asked, didn't you? Bill's been a real forceful advocate, and as he is for workers' issues and justice and equity across the region. So thanks for that, Bill. It's true. I support this. I'm actively involved in seeing how we can move it down the field. It's you mentioned the three critical provisions. On the first one, the farm minimum wage, I think there's almost unanimity on getting rid of that. The farmers I talk with in my district and elsewhere are very quick to point out that they wouldn't have the ability to hire anyone if they were paying $8 an hour. Instead, they're already well above that. And so I think that one we can see progress on. Time and a half or optional day of rest. You hear a little bit of a mix. And then where we get the pushback and where we're working on is overtime. And so we have examples in the state of New York as a state that has moved in that direction. And so to me, where the conversation is this doesn't have to be an either or. You're either with the farmers or you're with the farm workers. I'll mention it for a third time. Working with the UN in the Middle East, you're often involved in, okay, well, how do we expand the pie? And believe me, I have a lot of farmers in my district. And so what are we going to do to have our own version of an omnibus farm bill here in Massachusetts to make sure that not only it's farm equipment, but it's also, housing for workers, it's transportation. All the farmers that I speak with also want the immigrant driver's license bill to pass, and on and on. So I feel there's a package to be made that is a win-win for our region. Making sure that our broken food system that has pushed down the prices of food here in America because of agri-corporations in other parts of the country, you can't even succeed as a farmer at prices where they are. And so we need to support our farmers, we need to support our farm workers, and the way we're going to do that is by making sure that the state steps up and make sure that we achieve both.
I want to echo Adam's sentiments. I think it's unfortunate when situations like this present themselves as hostilities, either or. And in this instance, it's not, frankly, in my opinion, unlike other industries. We need to support our local agricultural industry. It has an economic impact to the Commonwealth. More importantly, it has an impact on something that we all enjoy doing, eating regularly. There's an opportunity, I think, for us to step up as a Commonwealth to support this industry overall, whether it's opportunities like other legislation like Safe Drivers Bill, or actual economic opportunity to farmers, whether that's in the product supply, subsidizing the cost of operations for them in order to support a living wage. And we need to, frankly, have a campaign that makes folks recognize that it's going to cost more. And if it's costing more because it's providing a living wage to people who are doing the most important work we rely on every single day, then I think there's a war to win, so to speak, a war of words to win here, that it doesn't necessarily have to be farmers versus those who work on the farms, but all of us standing up, just like we did during COVID, to support our restaurants, to shop local, to understand the benefits of the people that we were serving by reaching into our pockets to give a little bit more. And this is a perfect instance of how we communicate about this and how we make sure we're not hurting the industry by helping the individuals who are creating the industry in and of itself.
Thank you. I think when we look at the issue of farming, it is true that it is a different business model than a regular business in that there is a certain level of seasonality associated with it, often. But I think the real question that we have to ask is, does the farmer and the farm workers have a different lifestyle and a different financial need than any other worker in the Commonwealth? And the answer is no. They're affected by inflation just like we are. They're affected by their debts and the interest rate associated with it just like we are. And I think we do need to support them. I think everybody in the Commonwealth should be able to earn a living wage. I think they should be able to receive fair benefits. And I think at the end of the day, if we can't do that, then that industry is not going to thrive and survive. And so I don't think it's a question of should we do it, I think it's a question of how do we do it. And I think that's where we need to focus our attention. So do I support it? Yes, I do.
Thank you for the question. So even though I represent suburban communities, I do have a number of farms in my district and have been in conversation with some of the farm owners as well as some of the presidents of some of the local farm associations. And as a granddaughter of a union carpenter, I support workers' rights. So I support the right for our farm workers to earn a living wage, to have paid time off. It's why I advocated for the passage of the paid family leave and earned sick time in our state, collected signatures to get those questions on the ballot, because I just believe that firmly in making sure that every worker in our Commonwealth has dignified wages, has living wages, and has safe and healthy work environments. So I would support this legislation, and just like I've supported, one fair wage policies to make sure that we don't have substandard wages in any industry in the Commonwealth, because I believe that every person deserves to get recognized for the work that they provide and the resources and the services that they provide to each of us every single day. And what is more important than making sure that we all have access to nutritious food and that we aren't breaking the backs of those folks who are working hard every single day to make sure that we all have access to the food locally that we so enjoy. So I would support this legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I do support the legislation. I think we all at this table share a profound commitment to workers' rights and workers' empowerment. I do think we're going to get that legislation done. It is building a lot of momentum. I know there's been several events around the Pioneer Valley to promote it. Let me just sort of zoom out for a second and talk about how I think we can get this done. And just again, and I don't think I need to remind this group about this, is how important agriculture, in particular small-scale agriculture, is to our state. Massachusetts is known globally as an education center, a healthcare center. We're also an agricultural center. We just wrapped up maple syrup season. We've got cranberries on the Cape. We've got asparagus in the Pioneer Valley, and the list goes on. We've got to do more to support small-scale agriculture. And I think that the way we will get this legislation done is by simultaneously raising the wages and the standards of the workers, which is urgently needed, at the same time that we make a commitment in our state to support small-scale agriculture. And here's just a couple of specific examples. I've, for the last several years, co-chaired our Food Policy Caucus with Senator Comerford, who I know is a friend to many in the room. We have worked for a long time to help expand MEFAP, the Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program. This is $20 million of food purchasing a year that's distributed to our local food pantries. We've worked to get a lot of that purchased in Massachusetts. We need all of it purchased in Massachusetts. We've also worked on the Healthy Incentives Program, which allows farmers markets to accept TANF vouchers. The program is oversubscribed and frankly is at a small fraction of the overall need. That's a win-win. It's local purchasing for our local farms, and it's support for people in need. We need to dramatically scale up the Healthy Incentives Program, and I would commit to that as Lieutenant Governor. So there's a lot of good progress on this, and I think we are going to get it done.
So this concludes the question and answer portion. We didn't have any time for back and forth from the panelists. It just, the time was very tight. This now is the time for closing remarks. Everybody gets 2 minutes, and the order is changing again. So you may have, I think you've been given the order, but I'll go through it and just tell everybody who goes next. So we're going to start with Mr. Barrow.
Thank you. And again, thank you for having us here today. It's always beneficial to democracy when you have a choice at the ballot box. What sort of team do we want going forward? I believe that the next administration will define the character of the Commonwealth. And so the question for us is, what sort of team do we want in that administration? We're long State House and governmental experience. We've got a lot of that, and it's good experience, not just at this position, but at the governor's position, at the Secretary of State, and all of the statewide offices. To me, the challenge is we're short experience from people that have experience working on many of the issues where the issue presents. I'm a distinctly different candidate. My experience comes from being in the field. And so the question is what do we think the future is going to bring us? What sort of challenges are we going to confront during the next administration? I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention again, I see a coming economic storm. I see challenges that are going to impact our ability to thrive economically. And I think it would be beneficial to have a team that is balanced, that has a team of people who have governmental experience, but also those that have experience working on the issues where the issues present. My name's Brett Barrow. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, and I would appreciate your support, not only at the convention, but all the way through the primary. Thank you very much, and thanks for having us all here today.
Thank you. Next is Senator Hines.
Well, I actually want to start by thanking the candidates. This is our first in-person joint forum, and we have 5 months of these, so get ready. Here we go. It's been fun. And thanks again for your light touch as a moderator. It's been fun doing this with you, Claire. And all of you for spending 2 hours on a Tuesday night to make sure that you're aware of the issues that are affecting us out here, and making sure that you're picking someone who's, for Lieutenant Governor, who really is going to be focused on Western Mass. This is a priority of mine. It's been a priority of mine in the State Senate. It's why I've focused on transportation initiatives, be it how we shift our RTAs so that they function more reasonably for populations that are spread out and smaller populations at that. I focus on a new train from Pittsfield to New York City, like we have for a resurgence in trains across Western Massachusetts. I focus on making sure every town in Western Mass has high-speed internet, and making sure our funding formulas, including for education, actually take in the perspective of what it is like in a small town in Western Massachusetts. And I combine that with my international experience in working for the UN, and I've joked recently that some of you have probably heard this, that nothing prepares you for standing up for your region in the State Senate or as Lieutenant Governor, taking on the big issues, quite like holding your own in a negotiation, in a ceasefire negotiation with the foreign minister of Syria, and kind of bringing those experiences and how we can make the Lieutenant Governor role incredibly effective for standing up for our priorities, and including those that I've prioritized in my bills that I've filed this year, as always, related to climate change and income inequality and racial justice. I recently became a father, and my 10-month-old is starting to crawl, and it reminds you of how important all of these issues are for the next generation, and it really makes this work even more urgent. And so I look forward to doing that with all of you, and thanks again for tonight.
Representative Gouveia.
Well, thank you again for a wonderful forum. Thank you for the questions. Thank you to my fellow candidates. It is an honor to be up here with you. And of course, thank you to the audience that is here as well as at home. I'm State Representative Tammy Gouveia. I'm excited to be running for Lieutenant Governor. It's why I got in this race back in June of 2021. And if you want a Lieutenant Governor who is going to bring diverse perspectives and diverse people together to solve our most complex problems, I'm the candidate for you. If you want a candidate, or if you wanted a Lieutenant Governor who is going to put racial and economic justice at the center of our response to the climate crisis, then I'm the candidate for you. If you want a Lieutenant Governor who is going to prioritize the mental health and well-being of our entire population, then I am the candidate for you. And if you want a doctor of public health who is going to put the health, the well-being, and the dignity of every single resident at the heart of decision-making, I'm the candidate for you. I hope that you'll join us in this race. I'm State Representative Tammy Gouveia, running for Lieutenant Governor. You can learn more about me and the work that I will do on your behalf by going to my website, tammygouveia.com. My name is spelled Tamigouveia. If you're missing the U, then you're probably spelling it wrong because my last name has all the vowels. I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail. I look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you so very much.
It's too long for a Wordle starter.
It is. I know everybody says I want to put it in a Wordle. It is a little too long.
Senator Lesser.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Higgins, and thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. I really enjoyed it, and Adam's right. This is the first time really we've been together in this type of format, which was it was a lot of fun. So, look, I just want to conclude by saying it is a little bit of an awkward job to run for, right? I mean, Nancy kind of alluded to that with her question earlier. You're running to be number 2, but I think that's why I've got something to offer, because at the end of the day, this is a Democratic primary, and we're electing a team to be a Democratic ticket in November, and then to govern as a team after that. And I think the set of experiences I bring to the table are going to help me be the effective partner to our next governor, because at the end of the day, the job of the Lieutenant Governor is to help implement the governor's agenda and help make sure that the governor's agenda is a success. I think at a time when we have $9 billion over the next 10 years coming to Massachusetts from the Biden infrastructure package alone, I've got the high-level federal experience to be a partner to our next governor to help make sure that those funds are well spent and that shovels are put in the ground to help our communities. At a time when we have so much in front of us, I mean, we heard all the questions about a very ambitious agenda we've got to get through the State House. I've worked on some of the highest stakes, thorniest, most complex legislative deals and gotten them to the governor's desk. Whether it was the 2018 Economic Development Bill, more than $1 billion in workforce training, the economic response to COVID-19 that we did at the height of the pandemic back in 2020, it is so important that we have that broad geographic perspective on our ticket and governing from the corner office. So I respectfully and humbly ask for your consideration. I know that the convention is coming up in June. It's around the corner. I humbly ask for your support, both at the convention and certainly at the September primary. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mayor Driscoll.
I think it's fitting that I'm going last. I think I might have the longest commute home. So
For once.
I do, right, for once. Here, I do want to thank everybody for their time today. It's been an honor to be here. And I know I'm not the local hometown gal, but I wanted you to know that I care about hometowns. When you're a mayor, especially someone who's also been a deputy city manager, I know the importance of local government. Think about it. Local government is what you rely on the most. We educate your kids. We keep your neighborhood safe. We invest in those places that matter, whether it's a city square, your favorite park. That's what part of the get stuff done wing, right? There's no hiding in a job like mine. I've been the mayor for the last 16 years on the front lines, tackling some of the most vexing challenges facing our Commonwealth. I think that prepares me to help lead with a great governor to help put in place an agenda that's working on these issues. Affordable housing, climate change, transportation, they're not just buzzwords for me. Educating our kids, thinking about pre-K. We've expanded that in my community. I know how to do that work, and I know how to help other cities and towns do that work. So while it may not be from your hometown, I care about hometowns. I've got over 120 endorsements from local officials that I've had the privilege to work with. I've read cover to cover the Rural Rescue Plan that talks about the lopsided nature of investments in Western Mass. Your geographic region should never determine your opportunities. For our Commonwealth to do well, every corner of it, all 351 cities and towns need to have access to resources. I think that's the role of Lieutenant Governor, to not just be a liaison, not just be a sympathetic ear, but to be a strategic partner. Local officials are innovative. They know what's happening on the ground. Frankly, they know the assets that are here and how to take those to the next level with resources, with technical assistance, and with a bridge. Sometimes we need the state to get out of the way. Oftentimes we need resources, but resources that harness the full opportunities that exist. That's the role I'll play for you. I'd be honored to have your support and consideration in this race. It's a fun time. We're going to have resources. We want to put them to good use. I think I can play a role in doing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have a couple of announcements, and then we're going to have a chance to applaud our candidates. So I just have a couple things I want to say. First, I want to thank... Oh, you can't hear me because I'm not speaking into the mic. In a minute, you're going to be able to applaud these great candidates. But first, I just want to thank a few people. Julie Pocola has been a masterful timekeeper. Yeah. I really want to thank our panelists, Bill Newman, Nancy Cohen, and Dan Corrali, who I think brought really important questions to the table. I want to thank Elizabeth and the City Democratic Committee for putting this together. I want to remind you that there's another debate for the other constitutional offices at Smith Folk on May 2nd. Watch your email. And finally, I want to thank all of these great candidates for coming here, for listening to the challenges in Western Mass. Some of you are living them, some of you are learning them, but we're all going to have to move forward together, whoever ends up being in this position. And you have an opportunity to prove why lieutenant governors are vital for the Commonwealth, so go for it.
Thank
Our
you.
candidates.